Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, once again, we come to you by way of Zoom. What businesses are open in the state of Pennsylvania? It's about the waivers, meat on your table, but first, the blame game. Let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Well, welcome back to the program. Joining me is the mayor of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Danene Sorace. I got that right. I kid you about that, right? Sorace, but I'm Italian too, so I can get that. Welcome, Mayor.
Thank you. It's good to be here, Terry.
All right, well, let's start with you made a lot of news this past week when you talked about the blame game in connection with nursing homes. I do want to get to, governing in an urban area and the special problems that you all face, but let's start with the blame game. What's that all about?
It's about the data, Terry. We understand that 20% of the cases in Lancaster County are from residents and nursing homes, and 5% of our cases are from staff that work in those nursing homes and personal care facilities. So that's 75% of the cases that are not associated with our nursing homes. And that's the metric that's been set before us, and we can have a conversation about whether or not that's the right metric. Really isn't, that's not the majority of the cases by a stretch. So we just need to be clear about what we're talking about. If we're talking about death rates, absolutely. 70% of the deaths here in Lancaster County are attributable to residents in long-term care facilities. But death rates are not the metric that's been set before us. And I think there's been some confusion about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's face it, when you at nursing homes and personal care facilities, number one, we've got senior citizens. Number two, many of them with pre-existing conditions. And there's no doubt about it. They've also asked for, statewide anyway, for additional resources to deal with the problems that they have. They've obviously cut off visitors and all of that. Well, what was the response to when you said it's about the blame game?
Well, I think that part of it for me is just that I'm just getting a lot of push to be part of the chorus of excluding those residents from our count, and that we're being unfairly held in this red
Sure.
color as the governor has created this 3-phase strategy. And I think we just need to be clear about what we're focusing on. In no way do I mean that we should not be focusing on helping our nursing homes.
What's the most serious? Go through 2 or 3 of the most important problems that you face as mayor of a city where you got restaurants and bars closed down and people are, live in a much more, I call it, compact environment.
Yeah, I mean, we live in a dense urban community, and that has advantages and disadvantages. I think that I'm not unlike every other mayor from every other city across America or the globe in saying that the economic impact of those closures and the vitality of our communities is being dramatically affected. It's going to take a while to get them back up and running at full tilt again.
Yeah. How about your budget? I mean, you got to have, the taxes and I mean, you have to be looking at how serious a problem is your budget?
It is a very serious problem, and it's a serious problem for every community across the United States, which is why a fourth aid package with direct funding to local governments is going to make or break a lot of communities. At this juncture, there is absolutely no way that I can see myself supporting a property tax increase. That is the only tool that we have here in the city of Lancaster. 2% of our budget is police and fire, and we're anticipating a loss of 30% of our revenues.
Wow.
Where does it come from?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. Maybe you'll get additional help from the state and the federal government and your federal government. Have you had to lay off people?
We have furloughed about 70 staff thus far. And we have redeployed another 65 staff that is part of a longer-term cost-saving strategy. So work that we didn't have the bandwidth or capacity to do in normal times, we are now doing, which means that we're not paying external firms and consultants to do. So we are figuring it out as we go, but we will not, we're in a better situation than a lot of other cities across Pennsylvania because we do have a reserve, but that reserve will be obliterated. And once that's gone, there's really no getting it back.
Has there been any estimates? I noticed that they started to put out, the number of people who have the virus and number two, the deaths. But Lancaster doesn't have the most in the county of Lancaster. Am I correct about that?
Well, Lancaster City does not have.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, Lancaster City, I believe, has had 3 deaths attributable to our city. It's difficult because the coroner and the data that we're getting from our coroner, which I really appreciate, is specific to municipality. The data that we're getting related to cases is by zip code. And so we're trying to sort that out. But what I see and what I anecdotally hear is that a lot of our positives are coming from essential workers. These are folks that are working in manufacturing across the county, plants that have not closed as a result of COVID, and they need to stay open because they're manufacturing food.
All right. Well, look, I want to thank you for coming on the program and be safe, and hopefully things will work out and we can move on, and health will be, everybody will get healthy. And number two, businesses will be able to open up. Talking about businesses coming up, guess what? What businesses are open in the state of Pennsylvania? It may be all about the waivers. We'll get to that in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Joining me is the Auditor General of the state of Pennsylvania, Eugene DePasquale. Well, Mr. Auditor General, here's how I promote this. Businesses opening in the state of Pennsylvania, it's all about the waivers. As you know, thousands and thousands of folks, after Governor Wolf issued his life-sustaining order where businesses who were in life-sustaining activity could open, but you could apply for a waiver. Thousands of businesses applied for a waiver. Some were granted and some were not. And let's be candid, it's created a bit of a controversy in this state, and you've weighed into it. What would you like to do now that you have the right? You have the right anyway. To conduct the audits of the waiver process.
So of all the issues that have happened, look, and obviously during this pandemic, people's health is significantly the most important issue. But of the issues that are specifically in my jurisdiction, this has been the one that I've gotten the most complaints about, and that is which businesses were allowed to stay open and which ones weren't. And there was a national model put out by the Department of Homeland Security on what was life-sustaining businesses. And then the Wolf administration went in a different direction and created a waiver process with some of their own criteria. And again, that might have been the right decision or not. I mean, the governor has the right to set those policies, but we want to make sure that it was a fair process for all businesses across the state, for the ones that were applying for the waivers. Whether they got it or not, we want to make sure it was a fair process and it made sense.
Well, this is important because, I mean, look, we want everybody to be healthy, and we don't want to do things that endanger the health, but the economy is critical. I mean, we're in a recession now. There are concerns that we could slip into a depression. We're pushing 16% unemployment, as you know well, and somehow, some way, we have to find a way to get businesses open. We have to do them safely.
That's right.
what process are you going to use to do these audits of the waivers? How are you going to conduct it?
So first of all, we're going to ask the question, why did they go away from the national model? Okay, again, there could be very good reasons for that, but we want to make sure, well, those are sound reasons why they went away from the national model. Then also, and again, Terry, this is talking about businesses staying open. And look, yes, they all have to have the appropriate processes, the social distancing, all that stuff. But why were some allowed to open and some weren't through the waiver process? Again, could be justified, but we want to make sure that was fair. Because when you have a multiple different people taking those phone calls, different people getting the requests online, and yes, they all have a manager, but we all know that if you have 20 different people answering the phone, all giving different opinions, the possibility exists, again, the possibility exists that some businesses were being given a waiver and some were not, and they actually were all in the same boat, at least as far as what they should have been legally. So we want to find out exactly how that shook out.
And Governor Wolf didn't take umbrage at it. And he said he supports what you're doing. And I must tell you, that's a little surprising. I don't mean that meanly in any way,
Right.
but you're examining something that his administration did, correct?
Right. And look, the governor had a very good conversation. He said, and he made it very clear. He goes, two things. He said very clearly. One was, if anybody on my team isn't cooperating, I want to know immediately and I'll fix it. He goes, and number two, he goes, if we made a mistake, I want to know it. And when this first broke out, one of the things the governor and I both said is, look, we're all going to do things right and wrong during this pandemic. It's human beings. Like, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to do things right too. We want to also try to do the best we can. A former college football player here, we say review the film. When this is over, we want to see exactly what we did right and what we did wrong, so that when this happens again, and we think it may happen again, we want to make sure that the state is better prepared.
Well, let me go to, I want to get one more quick question, and then I want to get to the unemployment compensation situation. How long is this going to take? I know that's not a good question to ask you, right?
A lot of it, look, the challenge is obviously during a pandemic, we're not all in the finance building right across the street from community and economic development to do this audit. So that creates a challenge. But look, if the Wolf administration cooperates, which we believe they will, and we have every reason to believe they will, we believe that we can get the data we're requesting pretty quickly. The full audit is going to probably take a little bit of time, but if there's alarming things or things that need to be rectified immediately, we think we can get at that pretty quickly.
All right, I want to go to quickly to one other subject. Hundreds of thousands of people have applied for unemployment compensation in this state, and there's a jam up trying to get through to the Department of Labor and to get that all worked out. Where does all that stand?
Well, if you want to talk about something that is probably one of the more frustrating things that I've dealt with in my tenure as Auditor General, we came out in the spring of 2017 with an audit that described the unemployment compensation system in Pennsylvania as being held together with duct tape and bubble gum. And that was probably because I was in a good mood describing it in an optimistic way. And what we said that day, and what I said during my press conference when we brought it out, was that this system cannot handle another recession. And the necessary changes weren't made. Look, we've got a lot of good people at the Department of Labor and Industry. They're doing the best they can to process this, but we're talking about a computer system that is COBOL. And that is, for anybody who went to high school in the 80s, yes, that's the computer system we're talking about here. And it is not prepared to deal with the volume. Now, I don't think we would have ever been prepared for a pandemic, but dealing with a recession should have been better ready. I know there's a new system going to be up and running October 1st. We believe that will be a better system that will help rectify this, but there's a lot of people struggling right now. And look, they would have been struggling anyway, but they could have at least better had their unemployment situation handled so they could get their unemployment checks. And I'm not happy that our recommendations weren't fully implemented.
Well, look, I want to thank you for coming on the program. All right, coming up next, how about this? Meat on your table. The Pennsylvania Secretary of Agriculture joins me. We're going to talk about food supply in the state of Pennsylvania. Back in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Welcome back. Joining me is Russell Redding. He's the Pennsylvania Secretary of Agriculture. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. It's great to see you and hear you.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of controversies going on in the meat industry, with the cattle ranchers saying there's plenty of cattle, there's plenty of beef, and then you have the meat processors, and they've had to cut back processing, close some plants now. Tyson, it looks like they're reopening some, and then the prices have gone up, and that's created quite a stir and quite a problem for, as I put it earlier, putting meat on the table.
Yeah. Not an easy thing to do, right? When you think about agriculture and how interwoven our food system is, I mean, it has all been revealed in the last 2 months. What is happening in the Midwest right now with Tyson's and Smithfield and some of our big packers is where Pennsylvania was 3 weeks ago, where it was close to collapse because of what was happening inside these meat plants. It is now stabilized in Pennsylvania, but we're still feeling the effects of that across the country.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, you go into some stores are limiting the amount of meat that you can buy. I mean, you thought we had limits on toilet paper and other goods. If you can find hand sanitizers, good luck. But yeah. I mean, that's pretty unusual. And we also have a huge agricultural sector in our state.
Yeah, I would say two things. I mean, it's extraordinary to see the limitations placed on milk and to place on meat. That has happened as a result of this supply chain that we are experiencing, because of the surge in where people are eating, what they're eating, and the protein sources that they need. At the farm level, I can tell you, I feel for these farm families. I mean, it is the most difficult thing. They are completely subjected to a supply chain that is predicated on the plants that are processing, operating in a highly choreographed sort of system. And all of that is we built, very proud of it. But now it sort of shows up as the limitations here, and it pushes back on the farms, and that's where we're seeing the real crisis.
On the meat industry, do you expect that that's going to get worked out that with the processing plants open? Because there is plenty of cattle. I mean, I don't think that's the issue. Is this going to be worked out, or are we going to have continued scarcity when folks go into stores to buy their meat?
No, it's a temporary inconvenience. I mean, I think we'll get this sort of stabilized. I mean, again, I looked at Pennsylvania and what we did 3 weeks ago to put that in a better place, and I think the other states, and with the president's executive order that he announced a week or so ago, brings some calm to that, sets out a plan, gives Secretary Perdue at the U.S. Department of Agriculture some new authority with the CDC regs and guidelines out there. That has already brought some calm. But we have these temporary problems that you're seeing right now in the supply chain, maybe as much as 30% of that, the protein market, particularly on the beef side, being impacted here for a couple of weeks.
We're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about Pennsylvania agriculture, the growers. I saw some video where there were huge piles of potatoes, not in our state, but huge piles of potatoes that someone had thrown out. Then whether or not farmers are able to produce crops in this environment and whether they'll get sold, we'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society, inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine, and by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Welcome back to the program. I'm talking with Russell Redding. He's the Pennsylvania Secretary of Agriculture. We're talking about all things food related. Well, Mr. Secretary, you hear these stories about whether Pennsylvania farmers are actually destroying their crops, plowing them under. Is there any truth to that?
So there is truth to it, but it's more limited than what we've seen nationally. We have a problem in the dairy industry. You've heard about milk being dumped, and that is probably the most damage that we've seen is on the dairy side. Some on eggs, a little bit of poultry, but given our growing season, we just haven't seen the destruction that other states have had relative to vegetables. But it could happen if we're not careful.
So overall, are you reasonably content, I'll put it that way, with the food supply in Pennsylvania, with all the agriculture, that there's no real concern about that?
Yeah, I describe it as being stressed but steady. We're okay. The food is available. We've got plenty. We've got interruptions, of course, in the supply chain. There are some temporary shortages when you go to the grocery store, but that's a demand, not a supply problem.
All right. We regularly ask about the health considerations for workers in a whole variety of activities, industries, jobs. What about those folks in the food sector in the state of Pennsylvania? What's the situation with the health concerns? Obviously, we're talking about coronavirus.
Yeah, so if you've heard Dr. Levine's sort of daily updates that she is doing, just this week, we have added the food processing sector, the food manufacturing sector, as one of the report outs. We've got 120 companies in Pennsylvania with over 2,000 employees that are positive for COVID-19. Now, that's a cumulative number, but it's also a good indicator of just how widespread this is and how much of a concern, and why the governor early on said we want agriculture on these daily update calls, and we've done so many things to make sure that the employees are protected, companies can run, the guidance we put out, and really making sure that frontline priority testing is done for food companies and food company employees has been critical.
Yeah, one of the other issues has to do with actually food security.
Well, I put food security, meaning access to food. I mean, again, we identified early on the need for a plan. We released that a week ago, a food security plan in Pennsylvania, because of this surge that we've seen at the food bank and the charitable level. You cannot have a charitable food system without a food system that's charitable. And that has been one of those really important reminders to us that in a normal time, you may have 400,000 folks in the month going to a food bank. We have seen 1.4 to 1.6 million people go into a food bank for the first time, and what that has done to stress our system, but also make sure that nobody goes hungry. That's been a really important part of our work.
Yeah, well, look, I want to thank you for coming on the program. Stay safe, and hope, as you point out, reasonably optimistic about the food supply in the state. Again, thanks for coming on. Well, as always, thanks for watching Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and stay well, and we'll see you next week.